Hey everyone, you know what's better than sex? That's right, house arrest.
House arrest is the best thing to happen ever since the age of home consoles, circa 1981. Now, house arrest is a modern commodity. Everyone wants house arrest. There's 2D house arrest, 3D house arrest, VR house arrest.
Shit, I sound like that? I probably got my scripts mixed up. That script was for the introduction of 3D video games, which I guess I got mixed up with my script for house arrest. But seeing that I'm on house arrest, there's only one thing better that I can do. Not talk about house arrest, and instead talk about 3D gaming, which is the same thing.
The Magnavox Odyssey was the first to bring video games home to everyone. The Atari gave games color and more advanced graphics. The Nintendo Entertainment System brought gaming back from its near-death experience. The Game Boy revolutionized games by making them handheld on a decently small device. The Sega Genesis gave older kids something new to try with better graphics, and the SNES began displaying 3D games in 2D environments. Now, where do we go from here?
Hell.
32 bits. It's the next big thing. Sega had already made the switch with a tumor on the Sega Genesis, but Nintendo didn't really care for 32 bits. They wanted to go straight to 3D and 64 bits. After they had already made a deal with the tech company Sony to help with the creation of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo began working with Sony to create the next console. By this point, cartridges were old news. You couldn't hold as much data on them, so companies began pivoting to a disc system, using CDs to hold more memory. The first ever of these consoles to do this was the Philips CDI system, allowing you to use CDs functionally to play games, watch videos, listen to music, and so much more.
Yeah, I went to shit shortly after. No one used the CDI. Everyone already had things that already did all the things that the Philips CDI could do. There was no purpose in buying it. Most people had gaming consoles, most people had TV and cable, and majority of people already had plenty of things that could play music, ranging from stereos to just DVD players. Hell, even cable had a few channels that would just play regular music. There was no purpose to the CDI. But one thing good did come of the CDI. That was the horrible Nintendo licensed games that came out for it. That, and it introduced CD gaming into the gaming market.
CDs were able to hold so much more information that they became the standard in gaming. Every console was converting entirely to CD disc drives, including Atari, who is still somehow active in the home console markets with the Atari Jaguar CD. And then in 1994, Sega released the first major retail console using a CD drive, the Sega Saturn, a fully 3D 32-bit successor to the Sega Genesis. Oh my god. How did this fail?
In 1994, Japan was huge into the fighting video game market. Everyone was playing fighting games. Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tekken. That's all the ones that I can think of. And when the Saturn released in Japan, it became the first time that many Japanese households got the chance to play 3D fighting games at home. Japan became Sega's biggest market when it came to the Sega Saturn. However, a lot of that didn't carry over to the West. People were eager for a successor to the Sega Genesis in North America and other Western countries, but Sega wanted to build more of a catalog before they actually released their console into North American retailers. But a new competitor was already selling out store shelves so quickly that Sega had to completely pivot their original plan. They needed to release the Sega Saturn as soon as possible to maintain their relevance in the market. But many retailers just didn't have the space for the Sega Saturn because it was so sudden that it would be releasing. And many were already having their shelves full of the console that was selling out so quickly. But for those who did sell it, they have to sell a $400 console, whereas their competitor, the mystery console, was $100 cheaper at just under $300. But who was this mystery competitor with their highly well-selling console?
The PlayStation was made by Sony. It was the beginning of a grand end to Sega. After a deal with Nintendo to make a CD 32-bit add-on to the SNES and a fully 3D console failed, Sony repurposed all of their research and patents to a new console, their own console, one that would rival Sega and, more importantly, Nintendo.
Crazy to think that the PlayStation was made in spite. I wonder what else was made in spite. bad example. But
so Sony released an entirely 3D, 32-bit CD console with the PlayStation. Retailers immediately began selling PlayStations, which sold out so absurdly fast, and game developers started making third-party games for the PlayStation due to its more advanced graphics. Nintendo's now outdated hardware with the SNES and Sega's Sun release with the Sega Saturn made everyone want to just go straight towards PlayStation. But Nintendo's old hardware was about to get a major upgrade with...
I always thought it was made by Colgate.
The Virtual Boy, a virtual reality version of the Game Boy.
That's about all I had going for it, I'll be completely honest.
Due to the failed deal Nintendo had with Sony in developing what was known at the time as the Nintendo Ultra 64, Nintendo decided to throw out their own 32-bit console. Released in Japan on July 21st, 1995, and in North America on August 14th, 1995, it was Nintendo's way of competing with the Sony PlayStation and Sega's disaster. The way it works is it used mirrors and stereoscopic and images, or images taken at slightly different angles, to prove depth to the human eye and create depth. Try it. It works.
Oh shit! Oh god! Oh fuck! It's a mirror!
It sucked and sold absolutely horribly. Everyone already had their sights on the PlayStation with its, say it with me now,
fully 3D graphics.
And no one wanted a neck-degrading red headache. The console bombed, with only 22 games being released, and its discontinuation happening 5 months after it released in Japan on December 22nd, 1995, and a year later on North America on August 1996. Though, I choose to believe Nintendo discontinued it far before retailers kept selling it, hoping it would blow up.
So that was it. Sony won with their first ever console. Sega was slowly dying off because of a poor release, and Nintendo just hasn't come back at the time. That was it. Sony won. And there was nothing Nintendo could do about that.
The Nintendo 64.
The Renaissance is back, bitches!
Nintendo was back in full swing. The Nintendo Ultra 64 was now out with a shortened name of the Nintendo 64, or simply N64. Released in North America on September 29th, 1996, this console was the first ever major 64-bit console, giving it its name, the Nintendo 64, or simply N64.
It's like naming your dog Dog. Sure, you're clever, but you sound like a toddler.
And then the majority of games made specifically for it had 64 at the end. Mario 64, Star Fox 64, not fucking Castlevania for some fucking reason, even Zelda 64. Though it was a beta name and it's now known as the Second Coming of God, also known as The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Now, you're probably wondering why I say that. Simple. Have you seen Metacritic? That shit's a 99 out of 100! Second place only going to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, or as my family likes to call it, Nirvana.
Anyway, back to war. World War II is old news now, Grandpa. In 1996, everyone was gearing up for the grand battle between the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64. Two fully 3D game consoles with huge titles on either side. Both had beaten Sega to a pulp in the past. Now it was time to see who would end up on top. Who will have the best games and the best console? Who will...
It was Sony. The PlayStation already had a head start in the console by about 2 years. Nintendo just took a little bit too long to release their new console. Not to mention the fans of Nintendo that had already seen the horrors of the Virtual Boy. Many of them were worried that the Nintendo 64 would be similar. Dear God, what if it was red? Of course, this doesn't mean that the Nintendo 64 bombed in any kind of way. In fact, it did really well while it was on the market, selling upwards of 30 million systems compared to the Virtual Boy's 1 million systems and Sega Saturn's 10 million systems. The N64 just couldn't compete with Sony's PlayStation's 100 million systems sold, but a path was set going forward. Sega had one more console left in them, PlayStation was on top, and Nintendo was a close second. Not to mention, there was talk about a new company getting into the gaming market. The console war was about to become the greatest and most brutal event in history, far surpassing fucking Saratoga, and everyone was ready for it. But there was one other thing that happened. Apple released the Apple Pippin, which was their first gaming console. Yeah, no wonder it sold like shit. Anyway.
I'm with the Intergalactic Virginity Police Force. This fool neglected to talk about the plane crash of 1997. As a futuristic branch of GameGo, the best video game store of all time, we are required to enforce that all virgins talk to some degree about the Pong crash, a major topic for virginity. We will interfere in exactly 1 week to bring a prequel. End communication.